Thank you so much, listeners, for taking the time out and joining us once again at www.coopradio.org, or if you are on the dial at 100.5 FM. This is Buland Awaz and The Rational. We are broadcasting on CFRO and always on unceded Coast Salish territories. This program comes to you every Monday at this time and goes until 7. We are going to be connecting with Zahra Khozema, who is a Pakistani-Canadian freelance journalist based in Toronto. And they have produced a really fantastic podcast series titled There Is a List, and it investigates Canary Mission, honest reporting, Canada targeting of Canadians who speak up about Palestine. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. Hey listeners, thank you once again for tuning in. If you haven't visited our website recently at www.coopradio.org, please do. You can get a schedule of different variety of programmings that occur at the radio station. We've been independent and broadcasting for many, many decades now, and we need your funding as well. So please feel free if you haven't signed up with us. It's really easy. There's a website you can get more information. And as promised earlier, we are joined now on the line with Zahra Khozema. Hello, Zahra.
Hi, nice to be here.
Well, thank you so much for taking this time out and joining us. It's a bit late where you are in the evening. You're based in Toronto, yeah?
Yeah, I am.
And so you are a Pakistani-Canadian freelance journalist, as I was saying earlier, and you've done a amazing work which is titled There Is a List. It's a podcast series. It's available at Ricochet Media. And for listeners who may not be familiar with this, the title once again is There Is a List. And it's a 5-part investigative series about organizations that target and profile pro-Palestinian voices in Canada. And certainly we have been witnessing this in Canada over the last couple of years as this genocide has been carrying on. And I wanted to just start off by first asking you to contextualize yourself a little bit for our listeners. So if I could just ask you to share whatever you feel like about who is Zahra and how they came to this project. And then we can open up and talk about the project itself.
Will do. Thank you for the lovely introduction, though. As you said, I am a Pakistani-Canadian journalist. I'm based out of Toronto. I work mostly freelance, and I do writing, and I also produce podcasts. This is my first time producing a podcast that is investigative and completely something of my own. Obviously, it's with Ricochet Media, and I have incredible editors to work with, but this was something that, was my idea, and in our world we call it our babies, like our stories are our babies, and I was really happy to see it sort of fold out into a real live thing, and I'm so happy that it's out there for listeners. My journey is, I think, typical of a lot of Canadians. I immigrated to Canada at a young age with my family, and going, I think a lot of immigrant families, we have this ideal of, this trifecta of doctor, lawyer, engineer, and I didn't pick any of those. So, and I ended up in the arts. I studied journalism. I think my parents were pretty worried about that. I think especially coming from Pakistan, and I think in our part of the world, women, especially women journalists, they don't have the best sort of treatment. There's a lot of backlash. So my parents were just a bit worried about it, but honestly, being in Canada, being able to do this sort of work is something that I hold immense amount of space for in my heart. I have a lot of gratitude towards my parents, and my ability to share stuff like this, to be a journalist and investigate. I think that's a huge part of my journey.
Yeah, no, I was actually thinking about asking you, how did your parents receive this particular project? How did you come to this project, actually? And then, you had to figure out a space for it. So you obviously worked with Ricochet Media. But where was the seed, and how did you come about with it? What was the sort of frame in the beginning, and maybe it shifted along the way. But maybe can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I wasn't working with Ricochet at the time. I was looking for just something more. As I mentioned, I'm a freelance journalist, so I was looking to take on like a project, a longer term project, because a lot of times we write stories and they're just 800 words or 1,000 words or a feature. I wanted to really invest myself into a project, and I saw a opening at Ricochet, and they were hiring a fellow for, and I think it was Journalists for Human Rights who sponsored the fellowship, and it was one of the roles, and part of the role was to pitch a story or pitch something that you wanted to work on during the weeks that you'd be on that fellowship. And I thought a lot about what I wanted that to be. I knew I wanted it to be really meaningful, and I wanted it to be more than just an article. So I thought this was a perfect opportunity to pitch a podcast. I struggled with the idea, because you have all these ideas in the beginning, and then once you actually have an opportunity, all the ideas just seem to vanish.
Yes.
And I did what I always do, and a lot of us always do. I was scrolling TikTok, and I saw a video about Canary Mission. And I can't remember what exactly it was, but as soon as I heard it, I was like, oh my God, I need to take a break from my scrolling, and I need to Google what this is. And I went onto the website, which is Canary Mission's website, and I saw that there was a Canada section. So essentially, if you're not familiar, Canary Mission is a anonymously run blacklist, which pretty much just targets students and academics and people on campuses. If they're part of any pro-Palestine movements, or even I want to say Muslim movements, a lot of times people from the MSA are also targeted. Essentially, they make a profile about you, and anytime you Google your name, it's the first thing that sort of comes up, and things like terrorist sympathizer or anti-Semitic, these are words that are sort of thrown around in your profile. So for any potential employer, this is what jumps out, and it could harm your employment prospects, especially if you are, in your early 20s, you just graduated, you're looking for a job. This becomes incredibly hard. And then there's other consequences as well. But regardless, I was on this website, and I saw that there's a Canada section. It's predominantly Americans, but they have a special section for Canada. And I was scrolling, and there was around 17, 18 pages, and I kept hitting next. And when I got to the last page, I saw a face, and it was a friend of mine that I went to school with. And I was like, oh my God. And I clicked her profile. I immediately took a picture of my laptop screen, and I sent it to her. And I was like, do you know you're on this? And she sent me a few voice notes back saying that, yes, this thing has been following her around for the last 10 years. It's made her life a living hell.
Because I was going to ask you.
And that's where I got this idea.
Wow. Okay. But yeah, I mean, that's crazy, because 10 years? I was going to ask you, how long has that been going on? 10 years? It's been an anonymous.
It's been around for around a decade.
Right.
We know. And that's when they first started profiling people.
Sure.
And that's the year, I think, that's around the time that I also graduated. So I know a lot of people, in the activism space who were part of Students for Justice for Palestine, MSA, all these fundraisers for Syria and things like that. All of that was happening, and it was a very incredible time to be a student, where there was so much activism. There was all these incredible conversations going on, all these great initiatives people were part of, and essentially, I guess Canary Mission started taking notes, and they started featuring a lot of these people on their website. and it just made their like lives a living hell. Now, there's around 400 profiles of Canadians on the site. There's around 5,000 profiles in general, but there's 400 of them belong to Canadians, and only those exist because like we're in this like post-encampment era of a lot of these courageous students who've like camped out on campuses for months and weeks. So a lot of their work was very visible, especially in a time where everyone's chronically online and documenting. So now this is like, I guess, like the third or fourth wave of activists that they've put on their website. So I think it's still very incredibly worrying, but the amount of backlash has, like, I guess, died down just a little bit in terms of like death threats constantly. But again, it's still a huge obstacle when it comes to employment and when it comes to travel, which is a huge thing that I've seen.
Wow. That's really awesome to hear that you were uncovering this kind of stuff. But then you dug deeper as well, and you found out other things about Canary Mission. Can you share with us what you've uncovered, and if you want to also mention Honest Reporting Canada, which was another organization that you looked into, which is similar in its mandates. And I guess the overall question is like, so what is it around these organizations that have been, I mean, what I'm trying to say is like, how come they have had so much, quote unquote, in scare quotes, whatever, credibility? I mean, why are they taken so seriously? Because on the face of it, we see what they're doing. We can understand what they're doing, unfortunately.
It's a great question. So the first part of it, I think there's a lot of organizations like Canary Mission. Obviously, Canary Mission is one of the most notorious ones because it's run anonymously. And I think that's the major pull here. Like, who's running it? Where is it based out of? Who's funding it? I think these were questions a lot of journalists were asking, even when it first came around like 10 years ago. And I'm definitely not the first person to look into them. There's been incredible journalists and publications who spent a lot of time digging into Canary Mission, and they were able to find tax records from like huge like Jewish foundations based out in LA, and they were able to track them to this nonprofit called Megamat Shalom based in Israel. And essentially on the tax receipt it said Megamat Shalom for this donation is for Megamat Shalom for Canary Mission, something like that. And these would be like thousands and thousands of dollars, and I think that's when we started, like, that's when journalists started looking at Israel, and they found a nonprofit called Megamat Shalom. And Israel also has a database of all of its charities and nonprofits, and so they were able to find some of the people behind it. And I think that changes. In that first wave, I don't think they were like Canary Mission or Megamat Shalom, I guess, in that sense, expected that people were going to find them like this, but they did. And there were very prominent Americans and Israelis on there, but what happened was they keep changing seasonally, like they keep changing that team. So what we found out was that I was researching their current team now, and I think it was really difficult to find who is behind that. And it's because a lot of it is in Hebrew. And when you Google translate those government pages from Hebrew to English, and you're trying to like Google those names, you're not gonna get any results. It's because those spellings are different. You're not sure where you're looking. I found the trick to be that you have to search the names in Hebrew, and you have to constantly keep going back and forth between the languages to try to find people. And we did end up finding at least 3 people, we ended up identifying them. And, these are, one of them was a previously IDF sergeant. There's auditors, there's lawyers, there's tax people that are involved in all of this. And I also just want to say that allegedly, Megamat Shalom runs Canary Mission, because they've not responded to any of this. They've, at least to me, they haven't responded to any of my emails, confirming or denying anything. Their workplaces haven't said anything. So that's where we leave Canary Mission. And then, as I said, there's a lot of these organizations, and especially in Canada, the big one is Honest Reporting Canada. And Honest Reporting Canada exists in the US and the UK, but they also have a Canadian branch. And they essentially target journalists, and they got a lot of they got their charity status, I think, in 2019, but they've been around since the early 2000s. So they essentially, what they do is, like, let's say the CBC wrote an article and they talked about, something about Palestine and that, and if Honest Reporting Canada saw that, they didn't like some of the language that was used, they would write an expose on their website about this article, or the journalist that wrote it, or the publication that published it, and they would call them anti-Semitic, or they said they were peddling lies or whatever it is, and essentially they would tell their thousands of, I guess, followers to email or tweet or contact the editor or the journalist or the publication to change the language or remove the content, essentially. And that put a lot of newsrooms under pressure, and especially when you're talking about language that could be racist or anti-Semitic, like, everyone is sort of scared of this word. So it just puts a lot of pressure on news media, because they have to, again, now investigate every single thing that's happening, or all the complaints they get, or for the CBC, they have to investigate through the ombudsman person. The second part of your question, why they have so much, why they have credibility, Honest Reporting Canada, it's in their name. They have to call themselves Reporting Canada. They sort of try to legitimize themselves. They have money. They have a lot of money, and they have a lot of social cachet. They can. I actually went to the Honest Reporting Canada office, I want to say, for lack of a better term, in Toronto, and it's the address that was listed on their CRA forms. So they weren't getting back to me. I really wanted to get an interview or a comment, so I ended up going to their office, and it was in this, like, big bank building, and I was just like, okay, you know what, in Toronto they probably won't even let me there, but apparently the floor was clear. I clicked it on the elevator, I went all the way up, and when I got there, I asked the guy, I'm like, hey, can you tell me where Honest Reporting Canada is? I, like, looked the whole floor, I couldn't find them. And they told me they were a law firm instead. When I went back home, I Googled the law firm, and I realized that the law firm, I guess, Honest Reporting Canada hired the law firm, I assume. These are just assumptions that I've made, because on the CRA page, the law firm is listed as a contact when it comes to the Honest Reporting Canada's contact, email contact. So that's when I put two and two together. And this is a huge law firm, so I was like, wow, these people have a lot of funding. And a lot of their funding is also known. Previous journalists from the Maple, for example, have gotten the records, and we know what foundations fund them as well. A lot of them yeah, they're big foundations. I won't get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, no, certainly. I mean, they've been operating for, as you said, for decades, and so they've definitely streamlined themselves into being effective, and they have been up to this point. I think we are becoming more and more aware, and your podcast series certainly helps listeners, ordinary Canadians, and even, I mean, whoever. I mean, because now it's going to be accessible. Anybody is going to be able to hear this from anywhere. Let's talk a little bit more about the podcast itself. So it's a 5-part series, and we've already touched on a couple of the organizations that you unpack, and but there's clearly much more to putting a podcast together, from the interviews, the discussions you've had, some of the other themes that you've picked up along to sort of put it together. Can you talk to us a little bit about the podcast in general, and what listeners can look out for? What kinds of things were interesting for you? And then I have one more question before we wind down.
Yeah. I think some of the themes in the show that continue to come up are surveillance. There's themes about freedom of speech. There obviously, we have to talk about genocide as well, and the normalization of through propaganda. I think a lot of these themes continue to come up. Surveillance was really just a very interesting one for me. Like, okay, you know, if, let's say, a pro-Israel / Zionist organization saw that you're pro-Palestinian, you are an activist, or whatever it is, in whatever capacity that you practice that, in whatever space it is, they not only, you know, make this profile of you, let's say, but they also keep tabs on you, you know, which is crazy. To me, that was really fascinating, because the first person you hear from in episode 1 is Amal, and Amal is my friend who I talked about earlier, and she talked about how in the 10 years they continue to follow her. Like, okay, first they put her on the site. Okay, she got that initial wave of hate. Her employers got calls. But she's like, I still can't go online anymore. I still cannot write any tweets. I can't post a TikTok without these people finding it, like, almost immediately, and also adding it to her profile. Like, you know, she took down her LinkedIn account, and then she made a new one, and they featured the new LinkedIn account on her profile, which was really just very eye-opening for me, because that kind of surveillance takes a lot of, I don't know, maybe manpower. Maybe in this day and age they've made it into a more like an algorithmic sort of thing, but a lot of that takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of tab keeping. It was a huge, I think, theme in the show that you know, honestly, it keeps me awake. Like, it to know that you could be, you know, your digital footprint is like constantly going to be watched over. And this is, again, as I said, this is just Canary Mission. It's just one sort of entity. There's a lot of them. Like, Honest Reporting Canada is, again, one, but there's a lot of little ones. There's like these Twitter accounts also based in Canada, and they're run anonymously, and what they'll do is just take your, like, tag you, put your picture there, tag your employer, and be like, this person is anti-Semitic, what are you doing about it? You know, these blanket labels that are just put on you with screenshots of your face. It's like dragging somebody through, like, a public square and, you know, completely, like, shaming them. It's just it's crazy, because there's so much surveillance happening in that sense.
That's really That's wicked and really alarming. Wow. I wanted to also ask you about the last episode, episode 5, which you've titled "The Anti-List." Can you give us a little bit of a frame around what that's all about?
Yeah. Every time I put out an episode, I'm like, oh, this is my favorite episode. Oh, this is my favorite episode. Or I got to episode 5 and I'm like, no, this is my favorite episode. It's episode 5 is, I don't know, I feel like it's like my love letter to this entire project, and it features advice I've gotten from a lot of the people that I interviewed. The second, third, and fourth episodes feature interviews from academics, from activists, from journalists, from health experts, and practitioners. And a lot of these people, and I would always like ask them, like, you know, like, how do you deal with something like this? Like, how do you defend Palestine? How do you dissect propaganda? How do you do these things and still feel safe? And a lot of the answers were, you don't. Like, there's a certain level of risk involved, and you have to take it because, there's a genocide unfolding. So, like, priorities, right? And it really just puts a lot of things into perspective. So that's one part of the show. And then the second part goes into some of these anti-lists, as you mentioned. And one of the groups I spoke to was Reverse Canary Mission, which is really interesting because they're, again, their take on Canary Mission, and they're essentially, we don't know where they're run from either. They wanted to speak to me anonymously in that sense, but essentially what they do is almost exactly what Canary Mission does. They also make profiles, and they feature why people are on those profiles, but they do it through a Palestinian lens, and they profile Zionists and people who defend genocide. And I was like, I asked them, I'm like, you guys are doing, very similar things here. And they're like, yeah, but we're different in that sense that we don't have funding that people like Canary Mission and Honest Reporting have, which is true. Canary Mission has thousands, I think it's in the millions actually, of funding, and it all comes from abroad. We don't know what country, but we know it comes from abroad. We know Honest Reporting Canada, from their CRA records, they have thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of funding as well. And they don't even have an office, as I mentioned. So where is all this money going, Mm-hmm. So it raises all these questions, and yeah, it was just a very refreshing take. With a Reverse Canary Mission, and they talked about how when people are, watching a movie or listening to music, they'll go on Reverse Canary Mission, they'll search up a name of an actor or a musician or something like that, and they'll be like, oh, this person is on Reverse Canary Mission, let's make an informed decision through that. And another interesting list was actually put together by Davide, and he's from the Maple, which is a publication based out of Montreal. Mm-hmm. And he created a list called IDF Soldiers, which is very interesting. There's around 200 people on that list, and it's Canadians or people in Canada or people who have, extensive relations with Canada or live in Canada, and who've served in the IDF, which is so interesting because, how do you find people like that, And he talks about how he, after he finished that list, he talks about how he found all of those folks. And it's through mainstream channels like the CBC or Global News or something like that. And their stories are celebrated, especially in this, post-October 7th era. Their stories are very celebrated. So mainstream media are talking about it very openly and honestly. And so he was like, yeah, that's how I sort of found those folks. And like, I think it's just a point to say that it's not illegal for Canadians to serve in the IDF, in the Israeli military. But it was a very interesting project. So there's also lists from everybody, and everybody's getting good at making. Yeah, that's what the last episode is sort of about.
And Zahra, where's the easiest way for folks to listen to this? Where would you point them to be able to listen to this?
You can find there's a list anywhere you listen to podcasts, so Spotify, Apple, or you can visit ricochet.media and you'll find it in the podcast category there. And
when did you launch it?
It launched at the end of September, I believe. I think it was the 23rd of September.
Okay.
And then we released one episode after, each week after.
Okay. Okay, so some folks may have already been familiar with it, but if you're not, it's really awesome. I mean, and it's just going to be one of those things where you're just going to have to go back and listen to it again and again because of the richness of the details and the information that you've uncovered here under this. It's amazing work. Thank you so much for doing this work, for sharing it with us, and for taking this time out to make us more familiar with it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Our pleasure. You take care. Have a good evening.
You as well. Bye.
Okay. Take care. And we're still chugging along. We will be coming back shortly, and we will be connecting with Medea Hadzik, a Bosnian Muslim residing here in Vancouver. We're going to be talking about apartheid-free communities. So stay tuned and visit our website, www.coopradio.org. And think about giving us a little bit of cash so that we can sustain ourselves as we bring you programming like this and other programming that's going to be coming up. And, in fact, later on in the program, we will be broadcasting the first couple of episodes of There Is a List about the program that we were just speaking about. So stay tuned.